Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Today, I'm going to talk about some things that I had wished I had known on my first day of flight school, but I learned these things throughout flight school. They're all not that big of a deal. They're just these little things that would have made the process easier, cheaper, and maybe quicker, depending on who you are. So, the first thing I had learned, and I was slightly aware of this on day one, but you know, throughout the process, throughout the years of going through flight school, I had really gotten acquainted with this, is to be aware or be careful of who you're taking advice from. Everybody has an opinion on airplanes. Everybody has an opinion on pilots. However, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a qualified opinion. Going to flight school or choosing to be a pilot is a life-changing decision. So you need to be careful who advises you on making that life-changing decision. Simple enough, right? Makes a lot of sense. Other pilots, friends that are pilots, FAA doctors, flight instructors, things of that nature. Just don't listen to anybody. Or if you have a doubt or maybe a little intuition about somebody giving you advice, just follow up with someone else. Like, hey, what do you think of this or what do you think of that? Anyway, first thing on day one is to be mindful of is who is qualified to give you their opinion. So the second thing is, and I would have liked to have known this on day one, but it is difficult, and it is difficult for everybody to know this on day one as well, is just how much money does it cost? I have a breakdown on this paper right here of each one. So the private, keep in mind I'm a CFI right now, single I, not a double I. So private pilot cost me $13,000. After that, the instrument rating was pretty simple. It's just a set amount of hours. Meet the requirements to make sure you got every I dotted and T crossed by check ride time. That is $10,000 for me. That's what I spent. The commercial license after that was a little more expensive than the private and the instrument rating. The commercial license was $20,000. The reason why it was 20 grand is just because I had to fulfill that hour requirement to 250 hours. So the bulk of that $20,000 was spent flying around, getting myself up to 250. The check ride for the commercial is pretty simple. I actually think it's kind of fun too. It's just a lot of maneuver based, So as I had spent that 20 grand, I was just, making sure I was good on the maneuvers and good on every requirement for the check ride. After that, it took $2,000 to get to flight instructor. So if you add all that up, from me personally, 0 to flight instructor, that's $45,000. Now, some people could do it quicker. Some people could do it, maybe it could take longer. Everybody's a little different. I will say this, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the fastest student and 1 being the slowest student I've ever encountered in flight schools, I fell around an 8 with speed. So people do certainly do it quicker and cheaper, but I was on the faster, cheaper side to begin with. Besides that, there are some little things you can buy, accessories, that will make the flight school process a lot easier. For example, this right here is a CX3. It's an electronic version. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but flight computers, which is what this is a digital flight computer. There is an analog flight computer as well, and there are flight computers available online. When you take your written test, you're a private pilot, you can use these computers on the test, and it makes the test, I'm not going to say easier fully, but it makes the process of doing the test easier as well. When I was a private pilot, I had the analog version of this, and there was a big learning curve. Well, maybe not that big of a learning curve with the analog version. And it got me through the private pilot pretty good. Got me through my written test. There is the check ride stuff as well I need to prepare for. The analog version got me through. Instrument, didn't really touch it much. And then I hit the commercial. When I was going for my commercial, there was all the math, all the flight computations that existed in the private. So there's that foundation. And then the commercial is built on top of that with more math and more flight computations. So naturally, the analog one, it could do it, but that's just more learning on my part. And I'm staring at check ride dates for the commercial, and I had to get stuff done. This cut down on some of the learning process of how to use these flight computers and allowed me to, it allowed me to absorb more of the math and the flying airplanes. So I actually really like these. I really recommend these. If I were to start over again, let's say I'm 0 and I want to be a commercial pilot and I'm going for the student pilot in private, I would get one of these right off the bat. They're very nice to have, they're very handy to have, and they make the process easier and quicker. Second thing to be mindful of, with just random accessories you can get to make it easier and quicker, is headsets. This is opinion based. It's not necessarily a fact, but it is an observation I had made in flight school. So this right here is my $400 David Clark headset. I love this headset. It's great. It's not noise canceling, but it's simple and it got me through most of the flight training. Now, as a private pilot, going for the private pilot, I had, I was limited just in 172s. Not a lot of networking, not a lot of friends. So I was pretty much in 152, 172s. What does that mean? Low horsepower and fixed pitch prop. So, and this headset was great. About halfway through the instrument training, I was starting to make friends, starting to network around, starting to get into bigger piston-powered airplanes, more noise. Larger engines, more horsepower, constant speed propellers. I had noticed this Dave Clark headset right here in the high horsepower, high engines, constant speed props. It was having difficulty cutting down the noise. I could feel, it's tough to describe if you've never felt it before, but I could feel a feeling or I could hear something. It's like this low frequency from those high horsepower engines, those constant speed props. There's just more noise, and these headsets were kind of uncomfortable because they were also, just not shielding me from the noise. Also, in private pilot phase with these headsets, I'm not really flying much. I'm doing some maneuvers, some quick cross countries, etc. But as I had ambitions to be a commercial pilot, throughout the instrument training, I was really starting to fly 5-6 hours a day. So not only are those engines louder, and these headsets weren't cutting down on the noise as much, but I was also in that louder, noisy environment for a much longer time. I finally broke down and decided to buy a set of noise canceling headsets. This is just a Bose A20. We're all very familiar with it. There's noise canceling right there. And this removed that volume that these weren't shielding me from completely. Super comfortable. I could fly in higher noise environments, bigger engine airplanes all day. So looking back at it, if I were to go to 0 and go again, I would just buy a noise canceling headset from the get-go. They are more expensive, for sure. I think this was like $900. I bought it on sale. I'm not even sure if they're still on sale. I think they're replaced with like an A30. So now I have 2 headsets when I could have just bought one from the get-go. Also, think about it this way. As a pilot, your eyes and ears are important. So you want to take care of them over a long duration of time. So the headset's always a plus. When it comes to books as well, you're going to have a lot of books or a lot of resources you're going to have to read as a student pilot. And the books, like the physical text versions, they could expire. They may need updating. They're heavy. you have to store them, etc. As a student pilot going for my private, I had all the books. My backpack weighed like 30 pounds. It was crazy. And I got kind of sick of carrying them around. And finally, about halfway through the instrument rating, I smartened up and I just put them all on my computer. It's light, it's easy. When the book gets outdated and needs updating, I don't even have to spend money on the book anymore. I just go on the FAA website and it's already there. So personally, I wouldn't be buying books unless you have to. Some books you might have to. But if you don't have to buy a book, just have it on your computer, maybe your iPad, and that way you don't have to pay for it anymore. You don't have to carry the weight around anymore. You don't have to store it anymore. And when it gets expired and is updated, it already exists in the online format. Not only that, but the digital version of the book on your computer, just hit Command F. That comes up as a keyword search. And with that keyword search, you can type in whatever you want with that book. Let's say you're doing some groundwork with your flight instructor, and he says, tell me about a cirrus cloud. You just type in cirrus cloud on that keyword search under Command F, and that thing will pull that up extremely quickly. As pilots, we're trained to save time. So any opportunity I have to save time, especially when I'm paying a high amount, dollar per hour, I take. So I'm a big fan of online or digital versions of books. Not only that, this might sound kind of silly, but when I started flying, I didn't realize I actually needed renter's insurance. It's very simple. Just like when you rent a car, you can't just rent a car and drive it uninsured. You have to provide either your insurance policy for it, or you have to pay for an insurance policy through the rental agency. Same thing with an airplane. As a student pilot, when you are flying with your instructor, you don't necessarily need the insurance because the instructor is going to have the insurance. But you're going to need the insurance once you're soloing the aircraft. And I was like, oh man, more expenses I have to pay. True. But on the flip side, here's the good news. Renter's insurance is actually not that expensive. I have a decent amount of coverage, and I can't remember the exact price off the top of my head, but it's a 12-month policy, under $500. It's just something I didn't realize at first. Now I know. This one, and I learned to fly 5 years ago. So this one right here could be something maybe everybody has by now. But when I started flying 5 years ago, I didn't have Foreflight, or I didn't have a Sentry. And I also learned to fly in New Jersey. North Jersey is the Class Bravo, Newark, JFK, etc. West Jersey is the Philadelphia Bravo, and then South Jersey is the Atlantic City Class Charlie. And then there's all the flight schools in there. It's actually a pretty congested airspace in my opinion. So going through the private pilot, I did not have Foreflight or a Sentry. By the way, I'm only talking about this from a traffic advisory standpoint. It got me through, and honestly, I really enjoyed the fact that I learned on private pilot without any sort of Foreflight or Sentry device. The paper maps and all that. So I have no regrets doing that, but once I got the Sentry and having traffic advisories, I was a lot more comfortable in the airplane. Not only that, but especially considering the busy airspace I'm in New Jersey. So there are some expenses with this. Getting into, again, starting over from zero, I probably would have had this on day one just for the sake of traffic advisories. It's nice to know where everyone's at. Sometimes it's difficult to see somebody. You're busy doing other things in the airplane, and it's just good to have an iPad with the Sentry for traffic advisories. With that being said, there are some little things I'd learned as well about getting this stuff. Here's just my opinion. This stuff isn't exactly the cheapest setup in the world, but of all the Sentry iPad setups you can get, this is on the cheaper side, and it's done great. Inside the airplane, the cockpit, things are small and congested. So I got an iPad mini, basic, brand new iPad mini from Best Buy, nice and simple. Also, keep this in mind. I've met a lot of people, a lot of student pilots, as I was a student pilot, but they just buy an iPad off Marketplace, everything like that, and they always have problems with them. The thing is I bought this iPad and a Sentry for traffic advisories. Let's say air traffic control gets on the radio and they're like, hey, same altitude, opposite direction, airplane's coming at you. I go to the iPad for a traffic advisory, tell me look for it. I'm gonna need this thing to work. So instead of saving money and buying a cheap, questionable used one off Marketplace, like a lot of my fellow student pilots have, and then it fails in the airplane, I just bought a $400, I think it was on sale, 8 gigabyte iPad mini from Best Buy. Brand new. Done. Side note, amongst the side notes, understand too, this lithium ion battery could be a fire hazard. This is a new iPad. I'm not really worried about this one. But those questionable ones, my student pilot friends were buying off Facebook Marketplace that weren't really working right. They'd get very hot. You spend 6 hours in a plane with it. I personally think it's not a big fire hazard, but there could be a little increase in fire hazard right there just with, having a questionable iPad. I just bought a basic one for brand new. I was done with it. This thing's been flawless. It's 4 or 5 years old. Original battery, everything. It's perfect. The small one fits great in the cockpit. The larger ones, they're going to start blocking things. You're not necessarily going to know where to put it. Things like that. I have the basic Foreflight subscription with, I think it's the middle Foreflight subscription. Basic VFR with the IFR approach plates. This is a basic Sentry. There's no battery to it. So, quite simple. I just have a lithium ion battery to power it. It goes for days and days and days. So just keep it charged. Bring it back up if you want. Also, understand this too. With these iPads, a lot of student pilots, including myself, I had to do this as well. But you don't necessarily need a mount in the airplane for this. You can just have it anywhere. You can have it on your lap. If it's quiet out, this isn't even on. I just have it clicked off and it's just hanging out. If air traffic control reaches out to me, they're like, hey, same altitude, opposite direction, airplane coming your way. I just pull it out, click it, traffic advisory, helps me spot the airplane. So you really don't need a mount. However, with that being said, when you're training for an instrument, I started to realize this. A yoke mount is going to take this iPad and is going to put it on the yoke. So then, and here's let's say you have a 6-pack airplane you're doing your instrument training on. So you have your 6 gauges. So here's your yoke. iPad's mounted. You have the 6 gauges on there, and it's all in one. I'm going to stand this up real quick. So it's all in one box, just like this. And your field of vision is all in one box. I meet a lot of instrument pilots who will have their iPad on their leg. And they're looking at this box of the 6-pack gauges, the information you need. You're doing your cross scan. And then you look down at the iPad. When you look down, your eyes are coming off this stuff and you're looking at the iPad. So you're having to divide your attention. And it was more difficult for me to stay at the proper altitude and everything, just because my eyes were coming off that 6-pack of gauges. So with the yoke mount, huge cheat code right here, in my opinion. With the yoke mount, you don't have to move your head at all. Now the iPad is a part of your 6-pack gauges cross scan. So you got all your information here, then you have your information right here. You can stay pretty dead on with your altitudes and everything, your glide slopes, your localizers, etc., with that information. So with this right here, I was able to do the instrument training a lot easier. In fact, I switched flight schools halfway through instrument training, and they had a little tab on the yoke that prevented me from doing this, and it was kind of a pain in the butt, to be honest with you, just because I kept having to look at the gauges, look down at my leg, look at the gauges, look down at my leg. If it's right here on the yoke, gauges here, approach plates here, done. Nice and simple. It was funny too. I actually even asked the flight school, the second flight school, with that little clip on the yoke that prevented me from putting my yoke mount on. I asked them, I was like, can we take that off? And they're like, no, can't do that. Anyway, those are some pretty simple, pretty relative things that throughout flight school I picked up on, where I had learned. And if I were to start over again, that's what I would have done differently. I could have saved my money on headsets and just bought a more expensive, nicer headset from the get-go. I would have used a flight computer that's electronic, save me time, not a big learning curve to figure out. I would have this stuff for traffic advisories and the yoke mount to help aid in me learning how to fly. I think the phrase is precision flying. Help to be more precise. And I hope this information helps you as well.